Thank you for coming this afternoon. It's hard to listen to a session right after lunch, so I'm going to do my best to keep you awake. And we're going to start with this. It's the year 2020. It's a summer evening, and I'm driving into the night by myself. And I feel like my eyes are frozen wide open with horror and shock because I've just received news from my husband that completely changed what I thought was true about our marriage. And in addition to disclosing a history of pornography, which he had been doing for the last 2 months, he was telling me about this. That night, he told me that there was also financial implications, not from the pornography, but from the choices he'd been making, and we were thousands of dollars in debt in a way that I did not know that we were. And that night, as I drove, I cried out to God, and I said, "Where are you? I don't even know this man. I thought that if I did the right things, I would have a good marriage and a happy story." And mostly what I said to him again and again is, "What have I done? What do you have against me? I thought I've already walked through so many hard things and so many hard shatterings, and here I am, and I feel like life will never be the same. We don't go home from this. This is life-changing." And furthermore, it's always going to be part of our story, because I thought that if after it's been so long, it will never be different. That was a lie, but I thought it was true at the time. What should I do in this situation toward my husband? What's the Sunday school answer? Call it out. Forgive him. Pray for him. Good. Support him. What else? Trust God, right? God won't give us anything we can't handle. There's a plan for this. All those things. I'm going to give you a little spoiler here to my approach. There's so many different approaches to betrayal trauma, and on the one end you have the sort of traditional Christian response, which is forgive, trust, move forward. And on the other side, there is more of the modern church or psychology's approach, which is take ownership of your life. If he's not being faithful, leave him. If he's not doing well, lay down the boundaries. And how are we supposed to find our way in all of that? And I'm going to give you a small spoiler by saying that my approach is somewhere between those two. That I believe in forgiveness, and I believe in trust, and I believe in the work of God. And also, I believe that he calls us to a response as a wife, and I believe that we have responsibility for what we do with our choices, and that sometimes we do have to take stands and draw boundaries and and seek the hope and the healing that will not come about unless we reach actively for it. I'm not assuming anything just because you're in the room. You might be here for a friend, you might be a pastor's wife working with other people, or you might be carrying really deep pain in your own heart, and I just want to be so careful in how I'm approaching this today because I don't know your story. And there is this huge continuum of what we call USB, unwanted sexual behaviors. So some of us struggle with unwanted sexual behaviors. And some of us, our husbands are falling maybe once a month, once every 2 months, and we're devastated and it's a big deal. But also there's so much other places beyond that to go. Some of our husbands have had affairs with other women, and some beyond that, someone in our family is sleeping with someone else or sleeping with someone in our family. I'm just saying there's a huge range of experience, and I don't know how to talk to all of that in the room today. But what I can do is tell my story, and I can tell what God did for us. And that's what I'm hoping to do. So if I say something that sounds like I'm making light, it's probably on the lighter end. And if I say something that feels super heavy and dramatic to you and you're like, what? It's probably on this end, okay? And maybe I've already made you uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable topic, but it's Mr. Rogers who says, anything human is mentionable. We're allowed to talk about these things. And anything mentionable can be more manageable. So that's my goal today. I don't have a picture here of when my husband and I were first married. I meant to put one in and forgot, but this is us now. We've been married 21 years. We have 7 children, 4 born to us, 3 adopted. And this is us just the other week on a date. And our story is one of grace. the fact that we survived 21 years alone is just like a miracle. And also, he has become a man that I could not have foreseen him to be. And I'm so grateful for the work of Jesus in him. When we got married, I was very naive and very idealistic. I believed completely in sexual purity. I believed that all Christians were sexually pure, basically. And I just put my husband here. You know, he was everything I had always wanted. He was a man of God. I knew I had picked the best man in the world. And I just really wanted our marriage to be one that glorified God. And I'd kind of been taught that if you do A and B, you'll get C, right? Like if you pray and you stay faithful and pure in your courtship and you seek God's will, then C, you'll have a beautiful marriage. And that was what I believed. I was very naive in a lot of ways. But, so we got married. And at some point, my husband shared that he had had a struggle with pornography before our marriage, and I had to reckon with that. And then when I was pregnant with our second son, so this would have been about 4 years into marriage, my husband shared with me that he was struggling with pornography currently and had been for some time. And I was devastated. And the lie that I internalized was, this is probably my fault. If not, give me somebody to blame, because I need someone to blame. I need someone to be responsible for this. And I didn't want to blame my husband because I loved him. And it just didn't feel safe to vilify him. And so I just kind of internalized a lot of that. That was one of the lies that I believed. This is probably my fault. Along with that, I am not enough. I believed I was not enough. And you can put whatever word you want in there. For me as a young wife, not understanding sexual sin, it was I am not pretty enough, I'm not responsive enough, I'm not experienced enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not, whatever you want to put in there. There's always something that we can tell ourselves. And I thought, this is clearly about me. He would tell me it's not. And I was like, well, clearly it is. That was a lie. I believe that good men don't struggle with this, and I can assure you that they do. By the way, I forgot to tell you about your handouts. You don't have to write anything you don't want to. My formatting did not come through properly, but write what you want to. Just sit here and listen if you don't want to write. But the lie that good men don't struggle with this, I can assure you that many, many men struggle with this, and including Christian men, and including men in leadership, and including men in the church. This is a widespread epidemic, is what some counselors would call it. Partly because of that culture of shame and fear surrounding it, that we can't talk about it, so it's hidden, and so nobody can admit to it, but a lot of men are struggling. Statistically, my husband just saw statistics in the last, month, and he said there was a poll of marriages, and they said something like 50% of them were impacted by pornography at some level. I thought that the only way for our marriage to survive this is if he stops now. That was my ultimatum. It's like, if it's sin, just stop. Why are you doing this? And why are you hurting me? I thought if he was truly sorry, he would stop hurting me. I did not understand the nature of addiction, and we'll be talking about that more later, but I thought, why would you do it if you hate it? So my husband was failing, and for a while I was the only one who knew that. And so he would come to me with a confession that he had failed again, and now I had to deal with all my feelings, and I had to try not to be too angry, because then it would make it harder for him to be honest the next time, I thought. And I just was putting a lot of pressure on myself to handle this correctly. So he put some things in place. He started talking to some good men. And he got some accountability software on his devices, and someone else was getting that, not me. And he made some progress. And so for quite a few years, I thought, this is behind us. And we have dealt with it. And then after a while, he didn't keep meeting with the accountability partner. And I was like, that's just, it's part of our past. And God has delivered my husband from this. The thing I could not understand was, why was he not shouting this from the rooftops? Why was he not like, God saved me from pornography? You know, we didn't talk about it a lot. We talked about it sometimes. And he always seemed to be doing well. And so I thought, this is behind us. And then in 2020, several men at our church were coming forward with their disclosures, and my husband was beginning to confess things that I thought were very tiny to me. Like, I almost did this, or I, was in this situation where I was vulnerable, and I thought, what is going on? Why are you telling me these like tiny things? And so I asked him more questions, and he froze. And I recognized in that moment that this had never gone away. He was confessing the tiny things because there was this whole history, 6 or 7 years, where I thought he was clean, and he was not. He would be clean for a while. He'd go back into pornography. He'd be like, never again. He wasn't proud of hiding. He was repentant, shamed, guilty, lonely in that, but felt like he needed to get it behind him before he could bring it to the light somehow. That's a lie too, right? So in 2020, I found out that there was this long history and my husband had not been clean. And then also that there was the financial part involved. And this was not him spending money on sexual activity. He was self-employed, and it was difficult to manage money. And so we use the credit card to pay this off until they can pay back. But same cycle of I'm getting deeper and deeper, and I cannot talk to anybody about this. I need to fix it before I can bring it to the light. When I found out those things and when I drove into the night, I thought things are only going to get worse from here. If I thought he was clean all that time and he's still not, this is going to be our life. This is here to stay now. This is what we call fortune telling in our minds. Based on what I have experienced so far, I can predict what's going to happen. We're often wrong, but boy, it feels true. Lie 7, the anger that I feel is sinful. I thought that. I had no idea what to do with this level of pain, and I didn't feel comfortable facing it. And finally, I believed I'm not supposed to be on this path. So again, if A plus B equals C, and I don't have C, I don't have the successful marriage, I don't have things working out in my life, then I must have made God angry somehow, or I must have picked the wrong man to marry, or I must have done something to bring this on. It's kind of like Job, right? Job is a very self-righteous character, and I identify deeply with Job, saying, I have always done what you wanted from me, and throwing this temper tantrum, like, how dare you, God, disappoint me with my expectations for my life. I had to face so much of my own sin and inadequacy and my own need for grace. If I don't remember to come back to this later, please remind me. But God doesn't owe us a success story. And we don't get a success story by doing the right things. That is not the gospel of grace. We get the good things because of Jesus. This is a responsibility that puts the world's sin and weight on me instead of looking to Jesus. I want to talk about some hope here. And by the way, those seasonal pictures here, this is not very seasonal, but all the lies feel to me like skidding wildly down the hill out of control. And these are some ways that I hope we can slowly rise out of it. This is more the big picture, and then in a few moments we're going to talk about some action steps that maybe we can do, some practical things. But this is more bigger picture. And what I want to tell you is the wilderness is God's zone. We forget that sometimes, and we think that a life walking with Jesus should be happy or peaceful or successful or productive, but the wilderness is God's zone. And this is in Exodus 13 and 14. I won't take time to read it all, but the nutshell version is in verse 17, when Pharaoh let the people go, so out of their years of slavery and bondage, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, though that was near, because he knew they might change their minds and go back to Egypt. God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And God went before them. In that pillar of cloud and that pillar of fire, he was right there. And he was leading them when it looked like everything was going wrong. He purposely led them into the desert and into a trap against the Red Sea because he wanted to demonstrate his power. The wilderness is God's zone. We are led by him. We are not forsaken, and our interests are secured by him. We can walk forward in faith and hope. My favorite verse on hope in the Old Testament is from Isaiah 43, 18 to 19. Remember not the former things, nor consider the things of old. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Again, that's Isaiah 43, 18 and 19. God is in the wilderness. Another piece of hope that I needed to hear was that the men in my life are not God and cannot be confused with him. And I know that sounds really obvious, but when you have grown up in a Christian family, especially with a strong teaching on authority and submission, this can actually get a little messy. So the whole submit to your husband as to Christ thing, the church leaders present God's truth to us, and we are all, I got them confused. And so when my husband sinned, I got furious at God, partly because I didn't want to be mad at my husband, and partly because God is sovereign over all, and he was kind of confused with my husband. So I'm like, how could you do this? How could you let this happen? You're all powerful, you're all strong. Why didn't you keep this from happening? Why didn't you give him the strength that he needed to be victorious? Why didn't you warn me before I married this man how hard this was going to be? I sought you on this. And I brought so much anger to God, partly because I was confusing him. Now, God can handle our anger. And I think better to say it than not say it. Honestly, he can handle it. But one of the things that happened for me during this wilderness time is that once again I encountered and fell in love with Jesus, who is the best man ever. It freed me from the need to be perfect myself. It freed me from the need for my husband to be perfect, for my church leaders to be perfect. If there was one really, really good man in the world who would never let me down, then I could find a way forward. And that is who Jesus is. Turn your heart to him, seek him, read his words, pour out your heart. He is there. And one of the painful pieces of this for me is that there's a lot of clustering in sexual sin. It's not just sexual sin, but sometimes the patterns that lead to that lead to many other painful places. For us, it was finance, okay? So again, my husband was not spending money on the sex industry, but the same patterns of avoiding pain through the easy path, the same patterns of I need to hide my sin until I get it fixed and figured out, and some of the same avoidant behaviors I'll do the easy path, I'll do the easy fix, and someday I'll deal with the consequences, but it's out there a way, so at least thank God I don't have to deal with it now. That was all interconnected, right, in the ways that he was approaching both sexuality and finance, but it was together even though it wasn't together, if that makes sense. There's a clustering. And then I hear many women say, my husband is emotionally, verbally abusive. He's really angry. He's not kind. It's hard to live with him. I see what he's doing to our children's spirits. There's that clustering, right? That's not sexual sin, but it is connected to the same issues that are driving this. A deep fear and insecurity about who I am as a man and this misuse of power. And then there's other women that I talk to who are like, my husband is my best friend. He's so kind. He's a good man. How can he be dealing with this? How can he be chasing this? But again, some men really need to be the nice guy. That is deep in their identity. I need to be the nice guy. And also I have no idea what to do with my sin and my shame and my humanity. So there's so many clusters of issues. And then in addition to that, how is the church going to handle this? And there can be a whole other level of pain associated with that. Again, I've heard women say, will they do anything? They're being silent on this issue. What if they don't even validate my pain by doing something about it, by addressing it? But often in our conservative Mennonite circles, it can be the opposite, that we are so horrified to find a genuine sinner here in our church. It's so horrifying that we don't know what to do. And we do a lot of shaming. And we put them over here till they can get their stuff sorted out so they don't contaminate the rest of us holy people. And that is a painful place to be. My husband was a pastor at church. He had been for 14 years when he came clean on his pornography in 2020. And he went to the church and said, what do I do? And they removed him from leadership for a minimum of a year. And that was a painful shattering for us of reputation, belonging, position, identity. Also very essential, okay? It needed to happen for us. But we, part of the really messy part of our story is that church became a place of incredible pain for us and isolation, and we could not find our way back. So at the end of the year, when they start talking about bringing him back on the team, by then we have become different people, partly through that shattering, partly through recognizing what we as leaders had done with sin that whole time we were pastoring, to say, let's address this in you, let's deal with this in you, and somehow separating it from us, right? And we're like, we can't be that anymore, we can't do that anymore. But as we began to talk about it, that was horrifying to our church. It was like, do you not believe in church discipline? Are you rejecting your discipline? What are you saying? How do you even dream of pastoring? And so it became simpler through all of that difficulty to say, we won't return to the leadership team. We will resign permanently and just be here as parishioners and be a quieter presence. This is a long point. The men in my life are not God. God is doing a thing that the men in my life might get wrong, and God is still good. Again, part of my husband's discipline was so essential and needed. And part of it crushed him in a way that no person should ever be crushed. Satan used that to break my husband. And I couldn't find him for months, maybe years. I was like, where's the leader? Where's the man? He was quiet. He was broken. He was ashamed. He couldn't make decisions. And I didn't think I would ever get him back. And so where do I go with my pain? Because church is pain, marriage is pain. Where am I going to find a path? Everything in my belief system felt like it was jello. Like I didn't know what was true anymore, and I didn't know where to turn. Another piece of hope I'd like to offer to you is that love is greater than infatuation. When I got married and had my husband up here, it is a beautiful gift to start our love so starry-eyed. But as the illusions shatter, what do we pick then? And I think that we can actually love for real. When we lay down our ideals and lay down denial and take up reality, what is, not what I wanted it to be. And loving is how we will survive this. Not by hating, not by denying, but actually by loving for real. Loving this man, this messed up, broken man who has hurt me. And also, he didn't know a lot of stuff about me when I got married too, just for the record. Now he knows he should have told me about the pornography before we got married. We didn't know that at the time. He didn't know that part of my story would be depression. He didn't know that. I didn't know that. He didn't know that I would be an angry mom sometimes. He didn't know that I would be sarcastic because I was really sweet before we got married, I promise. And then we got married and I became something that we didn't foresee, right? We don't foresee everything. And when we can lay down what we thought and take up what is, I think fidelity can be born in that space where we will love in sickness and in health, in prosperity and in adversity. And I'm not saying that has to look the same for everybody. We'll talk more about that later. Another piece of hope is that addiction can be broken. When I first heard sexual sin talked about as addiction, I thought it was a cop-out. Because I thought, I know about drug addiction and I've worked with drug-addicted friends. And that's a chemical. If you don't get your fix, your body will scream at you. This is not the same, and I thought it's a cop-out. But as I learned, and I understand still there are distinctions, but as I learned more about the nature of addiction, what I recognized, and forgive me if you know this, I'm going to walk through this just a little bit. Our brains work in patterns. That is how God made it to be, because otherwise we would get up every morning and have no idea what to do. We would have to remake ourselves every day. What is language? What am I going to eat for breakfast? What is breakfast? You know, we would have to start over. So God made our brains to work in patterns. And so what that means is we often talk about an ABC. So there's an antecedent, so something happens. And then there's a behavior. So I choose a behavior because of the antecedent. And then C, there's a consequence. Okay, good or bad? So for example, and our brain works with pairings with this. So for example, light example, if I want to watch a movie in the evening, I sit down, watch a movie, and my brain says, ooh, I need a snack to go with this. That is because for many years in the past, movies and snacks are like this for me. If I have a movie, I want a snack. So I sit down to a movie, immediately want a snack because they're tied in my mind. So I get a snack. That's my behavior. And the consequence is, yum, this is really nice. And I won't talk about all the extra things like weight that I don't need or whatever, but I'm just like, it's good, it feels good. I got my snack. Okay, now the same way in addiction, I think it is really easy to see addiction as a sexual sin only, okay? This is sexual drive. They need to do something about their sexual drive. Actually, it's often not that I need sex. Okay, it's that I encounter an antecedent, I encounter something in my life that makes me think, how can I make this feel better? Where does my mind go when I'm bored? Where does my mind go when I'm stressed? What about if I'm really sad? What about if I have pain that I don't want to feel? And if each time that happens, I have come here to this behavior, then over time, those become like this. Okay? Every time I'm bored, I go to pornography. Okay? Every time there is an incredibly difficult emotional experience that I don't want, and for some of these men, it has started early in life. Any pain, I have to make it stop. I have to feel better. Never mind that the consequence is incredible shame and bondage and guilt. Still, these two are connected. And my point is that it can be broken not just by treating it as a sin, by saying stop it, okay? Just stop it, just don't do it, but by treating it as an addiction and saying, what is happening in your mind? This is what was freeing for my husband. He worked with a counselor in Kansas named Arthur Nisley. And what Arthur did with my husband was said, why are you choosing porn? What are you feeling in the moments before you're choosing porn? What is going on? What are you running from? What are you desiring? And we could go way back to his childhood and see that loneliness, the shame, the discomfort with pain. I got to make it feel better now. And when we started exploring that history of what is pushing you to this, then my husband could look at those negative feelings and he could build his comfort with sitting, with shame, with isolation, with loneliness, with pain, and that could break that cycle. Instead, it could be, where do I go with those feelings? I go to a friend. Or any number of other things, but that are healthier than that behavior. And that changed a lot for my husband. He says that failure to deal significantly with pain is a significant driver in addiction. And I want to tell you one thing about hope here. Faith, Dr. Anita Phillips says, faith says it's possible for God to deliver people. Hope says it's possible for me. That is what hope is. Faith says it's possible. Hope says it's possible for me. If you have your Bibles and want to turn, you can turn to Ephesians 5. Otherwise, I'm going to just read it to you. What's in Ephesians 5? This is my next point. Marriage. Good. Wives do what? Wives, submit to your husbands. That is in Ephesians 5, but that's not where we're going to start. Do you know what's in the beginning of Ephesians 5? Sexual purity. I'm going to skip over some verses here. It says, sexual immorality and all impurity and covetousness must not even be named among you as is proper among saints. Let there be no filthiness or foolish talking, crude joking, which are out of place. For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. These are harsh words, even for me reading this as a wife. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, Do not become partners with them. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. That's what it says. And then 9 verses later, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything. So this is a little complicated. But I believe strongly that as Christian wives, we do both. It's a both and. It is not an either or. Do I rebuke my husband's evil or do I submit to him? It's actually some of both. And it's not an easy path, and I don't pretend to have the easy answers. But what I mean is, we can't take the one passage as true if we're not willing to consider the other. We can't just say, well, submit to your husbands, and so whatever he's willing to choose, I just close my mouth and I just let it happen. When 5 verses before, he says, call out evil. Expose the works of darkness. Have no partnership with them. And I believe it is both. We're going to talk about both of these, but we're going to talk about the boundaries part first. To me, boundaries are about what part is his, what part is mine. What do I need to do? So some people say, this is an old school thinking about sexual purity, but some people are still saying it today. If he was getting enough sex, he wouldn't be doing this. And people on the other end of that spectrum say, if his wife gets serious about consequences, maybe he'll come to the end of himself. Okay, but both of those approaches are based on the same lie, which is, it is my job to make my husband pure. Isn't it? Aren't they both tied to that same thing? And I don't think his purity is my job. What is my job is my choices, my character, my purity. And so for me, I think the most transformational point for me as a wife, I still don't know how to talk about this. Someday I'm going to write a book called Becoming Two. Separating emotionally from him enough to say, that is yours. I don't get to control that. This is mine. If this happens, I will do this. But I don't get to control you. I don't get to manage, to check your accountability, make sure you're doing good. And it doesn't mean I never reach in. It doesn't mean I never ask him, okay? But what part is his and what part is mine? Separation of self and self in a good way, because then I have freedom to follow Jesus in what I'm doing regardless of what my husband is doing. We tend to read the Bible very one-sided. Like when we read that passage in 1 Corinthians, the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. We kind of forget that part. Do you know that you have authority over your husband's body? And if you're not, if you don't have that authority, then something is wrong. Okay, now we can talk about that. We can talk about where do we go from here? But the right answer is not just, well, he has authority over mine. So, do you know what I'm saying? This is a two-way thing. God intended it to be a two-way thing, and if either one of us is not giving authority to the other, then something is broken. Now we need to talk about this. It is okay to set boundaries, to say, you may not have access to me while you are actively harming me. That is something that is within your authority to say. It is okay to say, I will not be silent if your behaviors are hurting you and our family. I will not pretend this is not happening. I will reach for help. I will report abuse. I will not participate in what feels wrong. That is because I also stand under God's authority, and I am responsible to him for what I do. This gets really messy. I'm not telling you how to do it. I am telling you that it is important to catch hold of both these sides. Because the thing is, we want to get beyond boundaries. Jesus taught If someone takes something from you, give them something else, right? Lay down your life for others. Walk like me. And I want to get there. But the thing is, he was talking to a very stubborn, selfish people group who was sure that they had all the worth, okay? And just like, who are you to take some of my stuff, okay? Weren't sure that anybody else had the rights. But today, if I can say this, in conservative Anabaptist circles, I think we might have the opposite problem, at least for women, that I'm not sure I'm worth anything, even though everybody else is. So of course you have worth. Of course I need to lay down my life for you. Of course I need to give in and submit and bless and help. But I don't believe I'm worth anything. And I think we need healing at that deep level where who Jesus made me to be, the dignity and worth that he gave me as his daughter, so that I can lay down my life for others. Does this make sense? I think it's both. My husband and I could not find our way back at church. We got very stuck. After resigning, we stayed another 1.5 years and tried to find our way, and we could not. And I'm not proud of that. But we finally realized we are shriveling up here. We are not bringing ourselves. We are not finding the grace and the help that we need. We have to find somewhere where we can thrive. And we left our church for our sister church, and that has been a messy story. That raised a lot of questions for people. It hurt some people. It has not been easy for our children. But what I have seen happen is that my husband is regrowing. His capacity to lead, his capacity to love. And God has been so faithful. Another piece of hope is that trust can start really small. So I don't think that somebody over me should be saying, trust me, you have to trust me. I think that is a red flag. I think trust is earned. And also when we think trust, we think, oh, I won't check his accountability data. I just trust that he's doing fine. It doesn't have to be everything, okay? It could be tiny. It could be, I will let my husband see a little bit of my pain. How will he handle that? That's an act of trust. And it's a chance for him to build trust. Can he sit with that discomfort? Can he do well this time? And that is sometimes how trust is built very slowly. It trails behind our husband's behaviors and can start really small. And then forgiveness. I need to move forward here, so I'm going to go quickly on this part, but forgiveness unlocks the redemption of Jesus in me. And I am not someone telling you this so that your husband gets off the hook. Forgive him so that he can get off the hook. I am saying this for you, for me. When I forgive, that is this. It is not saying what you did is okay. It's okay. It's not okay. What forgiveness does is says, I have been forgiven so much. I am not in any position to stand over another human and say, how dare you? Look what you have done to me. I lay down the punishment for that sin. I lay it at Jesus' feet. Lisa Turkhurst talks about a forgiveness activity that was super helpful for me. She wrote down on index cards all the sins that had been done against her, laid them all out around her, and then one by one she put her hand on them and she said, I forgive this. And what my feelings will not allow me to forgive, I trust the blood of Jesus to cover. Our trust is in him. I am going to give you some action steps now. And please don't hear this as these are the 1,500 ways to conquer this, to make a difference, to change things forever, because I can't give you the magic steps. And if none of these are helpful, you don't have to do them. Okay? These are things that were helpful for me, or that I would recommend maybe when you're in a situation where your husband is struggling with sin. Be a proponent of disclosure. I am of the opinion from the counselors I have talked with that if your husband is only telling you, that is inadequate. That puts an incredible burden on you as a wife, And it still means he is protecting himself and his reputation, and he is trusting you to protect him. And I don't really think that in authority we get to tell the people under us to protect us, to be silent for us. Think how it would be if you told that to your child. You may not tell anybody what mommy did. Okay, that's wrong. That is wrong. So be a proponent of disclosure. Ask your husband to tell more people. Say, would you talk to our pastors? Would you share with a friend? Would you come clean to the church? And then give him time, because it might take a bit. For us, it took a couple months from when he disclosed to me to when he was ready to share. But when my husband got to the place where he had nothing to hide, it was a beautiful thing. It was a beautiful thing. We needed a lot of time to grieve. Give him and yourself time to grieve your losses. So for us, it was not only our marital intimacy and safety, which was huge in itself. It was also loss of position, loss of reputation, loss of safety. For me, it was a loss of a whole worldview. We had to grieve a lot of things. And I lost too, this is still hard for me to know how to talk about, but that pedestal view of my husband. I miss it. It was nice when he was on the pedestal. And I love him and admire him more than I ever have in so many ways, but he's not up here anymore. He's a real man, broken, flawed like me. But there was a lot of things to grieve. There is, I don't know if you've heard of the stages of grief. There's 5 stages that a woman suggested, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross suggested in 1969. Denial, when we first have something where, no, that cannot be. Anger, bargaining, like, please, Lord, let this undo. You know, if I do this, would you give me this? Depression, when it starts to set in, that this is real. And then acceptance. And those stages are so messy. They don't come in a nice little line, you know, oh, I got done with anger, thank God, I can move on to something else. It's actually up and down and in and out, and they're all messy and intertwined, but there's stages to this. You're not going to heal from it overnight. Give him and yourself time. Challenge dishonesty. His and yours, we can be stuck in these thought cycles that just are not true. And when you realize you're on that path, all the things we talked about in the beginning, this is my fault, I need someone to blame, this will never get better, challenge it. Just be like, how do I know that? How do I know this will never be better? Give me the evidence. And I don't have any. I just know, you know. So challenge dishonesty. And do something with your anger. Anger was really a stuck point for me, because I considered myself a good Christian. And anger did not have a spot in my thoughts. Like, how can I be this mad? Where do I go with it? What do I do with it? And I don't necessarily recommend bringing all of that to your husband, because, at least not at first, because if he could handle negative emotion, he might not be where he is, right? If he was comfortable with all those negative emotions. And so you may be able to share parts of it with him, but please find a safe place. If this is your story, a safe place to talk to God, to a friend, to share most of it. For me, it was those night drives, and I screamed at God, and I am not proud of that, and it felt horrible and ugly and devastating at the time. But the problem with anger is that it is a protective emotion. It is a real emotion, but it protects us from feeling the deeper things. I don't want to feel pain. I don't want to feel abandonment. I don't want to feel fear, so I will feel angry. And I can see that anger is the red flag that says something is wrong. Deeper down, I'm trying to protect our brain here because I don't want to be hurt. But if I just say that in my head, oh, I don't need to feel angry, just stop feeling angry, I can't ever get below it. Well, first of all, it doesn't work. I stay angry. And also, I can't ever get below it to what I am actually feeling. So for me, doing something with the anger, and sometimes it was physical things like throwing rocks into a river, okay? And every rock I picked up was another thing that I was struggling with, and throwing it into God's heart, right? Or sometimes it was talking loud and angry to God when I was all alone and just saying, I know this is not right, but would you sit with me while I tell you what I feel? Because here's the thing, I sin every day. I'm selfish, I am resentful, I'm angry, I'm overindulgent. I sin every day, but the sin is not in speaking it to God or to a safe person. Do you know what I'm saying with this? If the anger may or may not be sinful. Where I go with it may or may not be sinful, but telling somebody about it is often the part we dread the most. We don't want to be seen as angry. We don't want to be seen in that shame, but that's not the sin. And when I got the anger out to God, he could meet me in the quieter, really hurting places that were underneath that I could not get to while I was trying not to be angry. There are insights waiting for you beneath the anger. And then let intimacy be what the two of you make it under God. And the reason that I talk about this is because there is a lot of pressure to do it right. Again, those two sides saying you need to give him more sex, more intimacy, more closeness, when sometimes we feel like we cannot. And also on the other side, like set boundaries, give him some consequences. And that is just an incredible weight to carry, to manage this properly. Sexuality is made for you and your husband. And it can be what the two of you make it. And what I mean by that is this. When I heard his disclosures, I wanted to be close to my husband. I wanted intimacy with him. And I thought, that's weird. Other people talk about never wanting to see their husband again, much less have him in their bed. Why am I feeling this? But what I didn't know till later, as I looked back on it, was it wasn't just I want to be close to you, but I wish things could go back to how they were before. And it was okay that I felt that. It was okay to move toward my husband in my grief. And he could handle that. And sometimes intimacy looked like me crying and saying, I'm so upset with you and I want to be close to you and this is terribly conflicting for me. But it's okay to be conflicted. If he can handle it and if your heart can handle it, you don't have to find the right way to respond in this situation. You can be with your husband what the two of you can handle. Because here's the thing about sex, it is an encounter between myself at a really deep level and another person at a really deep level and God himself. That's why he uses the analogy over and over, Christ and the church and all of that, because it's a triangle encounter. And sometimes it brought up feelings I didn't know were there. It's certainly not the only way to encounter God, but it is a powerful way, and that is why it is a battleground for good and evil. That is why Satan wants to attack it and bring it down, because this is where we are known, and this is where we are loved. And a lot of healing can happen there, and a lot of harm can happen there. People say, fight for your marriage, and I tried to fight for my marriage, but it takes two to fight for a marriage. What I can fight for is love. I can fight for fidelity, and that can take one person. Write a safety plan. For us, we did this together. So my husband was repentant, and he wanted to not be failing anymore, and he wanted to create safety for me. And so we wrote a safety plan together, and what we did, we used recovery language. Okay, so a slip is I hate to say big and small because sin is sin, but like I almost sinned, or I clicked on this thing or whatever, and then I thought better of it. That's a slip, okay? A relapse is when I just went for it. Okay, so we wrote plans for slips and for relapses, and we defined those things. If there's a slip, Ryan will tell somebody other than Shari within this amount of hours. If there is, and he will talk to her about this within this many hours. And then he said, I will provide time for you to go somewhere. If you need to process with a mentor or a friend, I want you to heal from this if I harm you, okay? And over here with the relapse, this is what will happen. Maybe it will look like separating for a short time so that we can heal. Does that make sense? It doesn't have to look the same for everybody, but writing the plan did a couple of things. And if your husband is not at this place, you can write one yourself, but it is so powerful to do together if he's willing, because for one thing, it empowers us. Instead of just being like, no, that can never happen again, I don't want it to happen, it takes away some of that fear and the powerlessness, because it says, if it happens, we will survive this somehow. Commit to measured honesty. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but the reason I say measured is because there can be this whole cycle of I only say so much so that I protect him, and he only says so much so that he can protect me. And it's this whole like dishonest cycle. And so honesty, but in safe ways. Okay, sometimes with a third party there, sometimes in saying, I will tell someone else all of it and I will tell you as much as I can. Okay, he committed to honesty to me. And I committed to honesty to him, but also with wisdom. I don't know if that makes sense. I can't explain it more than that. Reach for resources. There are so many good books, counselors. Let your church leadership have a chance. Safe places. The book that I found personally that resonated with me the most was called When Your Husband is Addicted to Pornography. It's by Vicky Tidy. The bookstore tried to get it in and could not find it. It is available on Amazon. It's a little more expensive. It's like $22. But she allows more space for divorce than I do personally, but she also had so much biblical teaching. And on this thing of I take ownership of me and I seek healing for me so that I can bring myself to this marriage rather than I have to heal him and I have to make this stop. So when your husband is addicted to pornography, I would strongly recommend that book, and there's many more. And I'm going to give you also a list of, this is my 5-minute warning. Sorry. I'll give it just a minute. Meanwhile, get out your cell phones and snap a picture of this if you would, if you have it handy, and then those who really want it can have it. These are all Anabaptist counselors that I know personally and would recommend, and this is only a sampling. There are many more. And so Arthur Nisley is a Mennonite man from Kansas who works extensively with many, many men with unwanted sexual behaviors. And his website, Hope Journey Guide, has a long list of resources for men as well as resources for women. Very helpful. Irene Bontrager is a counselor in Indiana. She does online sessions. She's been very helpful for me. Janelle Glick is a dear friend of mine. She's serving in Thailand right now, so she's not taking new clients, but she could be a resource. She said she'd be happy to have me share her name as a resource for finding someone. The last two are, again, friends of mine, but they can only serve Pennsylvania clients. But this is just a sampling. And you don't have to stay Anabaptist. I found some extremely helpful, either wider church resources or else secular resources that actually were very helpful for me as I sought my journey. But sometimes this feels safer for our people or for our husbands or for our church. And so I offer this if it would be helpful. But mostly stay in the story. I don't mean this has to look the same for everybody. Please hear me, that I don't believe that fidelity means doing everything that your husband wants anytime he wants it. I don't even believe it always means staying. But I do say stay in God's story for you. It is a good story. It has horrible chapters. He is so much braver than I am for my children. I want to protect them from everything hard. God is like, I will walk you through the hard. He's so brave. And sometimes I think also a little crazy, but also brave. He's so brave. And so stay in his story and follow that fire and cloud through the wilderness. I want to speak a prayer for you from Scripture in closing here. If you want to close your eyes, you may, or if you want to just sit, that is completely fine. This is from Isaiah 54. Sing, O barren one who did not bear. Break forth into singing and cry aloud, you who have not been in labor, for the children of the desolate one will be more than the children of her who is married, says the Lord. Fear not, for you will not be ashamed. Be not confounded, for you will not be disgraced. You will forget the shame of your youth, and the reproach of your widowhood you will remember no more, for your Maker is your husband. The Lord of hosts is his name. The Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. God has called you like a wife deserted and grieved in spirit, like a wife of youth when she is cast off. In overflowing anger for a moment I hid my face from you, but with everlasting love I will have compassion on you. The mountains may depart and the hills be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their vindication is from me. Amen. I don't think I brought enough closure to my story with my husband. I always forget to tell the end of the story because we're not at the end yet. I don't know what's going to happen. But he has been clean for 5 years from pornography. 5 years, and I thought that would never happen. So I offer you hope that as God was faithful in my story, he will be faithful in yours. He will be faithful if I go home and find out my husband fell while I was gone. He will be faithful to you. God bless you.